In the summer of 1969, 500,000 people gathered on a quiet farm in upstate New York. What began as a simple music festival turned into something much more, a movement, a cultural milestone. Woodstock wasn't just about music. It was about peace, freedom, and a generation seeking something greater than themselves. But what was it really like to be there? To stand in the mud, shoulder to shoulder with strangers, feeling the music and the chaos as it all unfolded? The memories of that historic event still echo through time.
My dad has a contract worker from way back who had some friends ask if he wanted to go to Woodstock. There is a city called Woodstock about 2 hours from where we live, so he assumed they meant there. Well, naturally, being the 60s, he got super stoned and passed out in the van. He woke up in a sea of people around the van with his friends nowhere to be found. He said it was the best mistake he ever made. He partied with total strangers and listened to great live music.
Woodstock was an extremely poorly planned event that was damn close to becoming a humanitarian disaster. The governor of New York declared it a disaster area. The National Guard had to helicopter doctors in because the rural roads were so completely gridlocked, and there were no medical services present at the event. The organizers failed to ensure there were enough toilets or even food and water. 2 people died, and there were 8 miscarriages. Leave it to boomers to blindly muddle their way through a man-made disaster and then try to pawn it off as some sort of brilliant cultural high point. Steven Tyler's autobiography tells of how he and his buds beat up and robbed a couple of people at Woodstock. It wasn't all peace and love. Bill Graham said you could always tell who had really attended by how they remembered it. He said those who talked about it being some beautiful event were lying about being there, but he believed those who talked about how miserable it was.
My dad went when he was 17. He rode on the hood of a car for like 5 miles to get the last bit of the way. They bought tickets, but so many people showed up that the fences got pushed down, and it ended up being free. He got stoned the whole time and had a good time. He remembers them coming over the speaker, informing people not to take certain acid. He remembers waking up to music Sunday morning, and it was the greatest moment of his life. Coming from a guy who went to the Beatles at Shea Stadium, the concert for Montserrat, and multiple concerts at the Fillmore East in New York. He is in the Woodstock documentary and is in Abby Hoffman's Woodstock book. Front row, looking pissed. He said it was during Santana and he was mesmerized. He has tons of music stories, and he and my hippie mom should write a book of their lives.
One of my old bosses had planned to go with his fiancée and brother. They all took time off work for this thing. His boss at the time was the one who informed him about the concert and urged him to go. They all lived in North Carolina, so it was going to be a bit of a drive. They decided to leave the night before and stop along the way at a friend's, family maybe, I don't remember, place and crash for the night. The next morning, they woke up and hit the road. With only about 2 hours left in the drive, disaster struck. A tire blew out, and they ran off the road. In an attempt to control the car, his brother overcorrected and drove back across the road, driving head-on into another car. His fiancée, who was in the front seat without her seatbelt on, was ejected from the car and died on impact. His brother's face smashed into the steering wheel, killing him instantly. My old boss was the only survivor of the accident. He never went into details about the passengers in the other vehicle. He said the only reason he survived was because he was lying in the back seat. He hit the back of the front seats and fell to the floor. He walked away from that with no major injuries. He has PTSD from that incident, and 40-some years later, he's still not over it.
My Nana went. She said she was visiting her cousins in New York, and they asked her if she wanted to go to some small festival upstate. Little did she know what it would turn out to be. Funny enough, she smoked with Richie Havens when she saw Jimi Hendrix at Café Wa in New York before he left for England. She said it was surreal seeing them again. We drove past through that. We went to Maine every year. I was 11. I remember my parents being perfectly bewildered by cars parked on the side of the road. No idea which. And seeing a lot of people. Traffic was crawling. It's an indistinct memory, except that, pre-internet of course, my parents were clueless about what on earth was happening. Weirdly, don't ask me why, I still have the license plate from our car, a 1968 Chevy Impala. Might not have been there, but even that's a cool memory. Cool.
My dad went to one day of Woodstock. I want to say Saturday, but I don't remember. Anyways, he brought his really fat pot-dealing friend along. They had no idea how big this thing turned out to be, but they rolled into New York only to be bombarded by 500,000 like-minded individuals. They had to walk 2 miles to get anywhere near the venue. After the walk, the fat pot-dealing friend turned to my dad and said, "Jesus, Mike, you could light a cigarette between my ass cheeks right now." I don't know, but that story always makes me chuckle. And my old man played there. He said it was a shithole backstage. The van with their gear got stuck and couldn't get in, so they flew in by chopper. He remembers no food, no water, and chaos. Still, they stormed the set and got out. When asked, he gives details, but honestly, he says he can't really remember much because Woodstock was only one of many huge festivals. They also played places like Goose Lake and Isle of Wight, etc. The only difference is that it was filmed. Being a small band at the time, they didn't care about being filmed and said yes. He says that decision was the end of the band because after that they played huge stadiums and lost the essence of the band. They hated that. Still, saying that, it also gave him a career for life and he still churns out the tunes they played then. The song captured on film was called Going Home, and it's still the show closer now, all because of the film. So Woodstock is a love-hate memory for him. Did people have jobs back then? Nope. You could sort of squeak by without having an actual job. You could pick up odd work here and there, maybe tie-dye some t-shirts and sell them on the street, maybe turn over a few joints for a few bucks. It didn't take that much to survive. Shitty housing was cheap, and so was electricity. You could hitchhike a ride if you needed to go somewhere. It wasn't the voraciously financialized culture that it is now. You really cannot imagine how drastically America has changed since 1969. And not in a good way. Why can't shit like this happen today? Commercialism bastardized the industry. I went to the 40th anniversary of Woodstock on the same grounds, and it was a joke. I got yelled at for smoking a regular cigar on the grounds. If our generation tried this, the entire event would be shut down with riot control. If there was resistance, tear gas. Our parents can only see from their perspective, and their memories have faded. Yeah, my dad tells a story about his friends coming by, he lived in New Jersey, and asking him to come along to Woodstock, but based on the reports of horrendous traffic, he said, "Nah. Yeah, mine now says he regrets it, but I think in that situation I would have done the same." It must have been so infuriating to miss out on that because the week after everyone would have been talking about it, and you'd be like, yeah, okay, I blew it. But then they would have kept talking about it, and kept talking about it, for 45 years and counting. 2 of my aunts went to Woodstock. One of my aunts has always worn pantsuits, never gaudy or old, and is very modest, well-spoken, English professor, and dignified. My other aunt is the same sans pantsuits and teaching appointment. Someone saw them outside the fence and, assuming they were very important people who needed to do important things, quickly ushered them inside. Then they were at Woodstock. One of my aunts still has her shirt. We also tease them all the time about being one of the naked mud people. Haha, they are awesome aunts. I like being like them. Maybe then I can be ushered into something insanely cool one day. My dad was living in Maryland at the time and drove toward Woodstock for the festival. After waiting in traffic for 3 hours near Woodstock, he decided it wasn't worth the wait and turned. I had an older coworker who said he actually went to the original Woodstock. I am jealous. Nothing like that will happen to me. The closest we have is probably Burning Man, but that comes every year. I mean, nothing spontaneous and good like that will happen. Was waiting for my A school to start at the Great Lakes Naval Training Station when one of my mates asked if I wanted to go AWOL to attend the event. He went, and I stayed for the school. I never saw him again. Sometimes I wonder how my life would have been different if I had gone. My dad went, totally sober the entire time. He remembers watching Creedence and the Who in the middle of the night and watching Janis Joplin swaying in the dark. He never saw Hendrix as he left early Sunday. He always said it was raining, muddy, and miserable. He had to pee in a coffee can because it was so crowded. I just went to the site with him a few weeks ago, and we stood on the hill exactly where he remembered being. He would probably do an AMA. I had a history teacher who went to Woodstock. The way he tells the story, he was in town by chance. A man he struck up a conversation with at a gas station said he should go check out the concert. The next thing he remembers, it was 2 weeks later. My old general manager went. He was in his late teens, snuck there with 2 of his friends, got stuck in the heavy traffic, left the car, and walked 2 miles to get to the concert a day after it started. He could hardly see the stage from where they were, but he said, Even though those days are a little fuzzy and I can't remember much, I'll never forget hearing Santana play. Dude is super cool and laid back, truly a genuine guy. My uncle was in his late teens, working at a summer camp and was set to go to the concert with some of his friends. The plan was for them to not go to work that Friday so they could make it to Woodstock in time for the concert to start. But when the camp director heard about what Woodstock was turning into, he banned all his staff from leaving. My uncle didn't get to go, and still has his untorn ticket stub and this story. I have a friend who went. He lost his car. It was never found. A woman I know went when she was 15 years old. At the time, she told her mother she would be sleeping at a friend's house for the weekend, and her friend told her own parents the same story. They got busted a few weeks later when their parents noticed her on the cover of Time magazine. She was grounded. My friend's dad didn't go because he had to work. After I heard that, I never let a stupid job get in the way of something cool. Worked out okay. My dad went at the age of 16. He still has the original tickets, untorn, and a program with Woodstock mud all over it. He's actually in the movie at one point, standing next to his tent and waving at a helicopter. He shortly dropped out of high school and moved to a commune in Vermont. I'd say the experience had quite the effect on him. His story of seeing Jimi Hendrix close out the festival while leaning on the front rail is mind-blowing. Can you imagine? Kinda. I've just been waiting for a good time to share this story. So, my dad used to be a mechanic choice engineer for Chrysler and spent a lot of time traveling. I guess there was one time he was driving and got stuck in a very long line of traffic and spent hours waiting to get through. He didn't get why there were so many people waiting to get into this field and was just annoyed that he was going to be delayed. Well, he finally made it through and continued to his next destination. He later found out that he was in line to get into Woodstock but never made the turn with everyone else. So close to Woodstock, but not cool enough to know. My dad had to abandon his VW bus and walk in. He remembers most of it. A guy I used to work with was there. He was only 14 at the time. He said it was raining, messy, and people were sleeping or passed out in the mud. The town could not support such a population influx, and they went hungry the whole time.
Woodstock may be long gone, but the memories live on through those who were there. If you enjoyed reliving these personal stories, don't forget to hit subscribe for more journeys back in time.